I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome, everyone, to American Girls. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girls series book by book, except here on Patreon, where we're doing whatever we think works within the world of this show. I'm Mary.
I am obnoxious and disliked. Nope, that's John Adams. I am Allison.
Wow. Thank you for being here, Allison. And, we're about to go back in time together. And, I just wonder your thoughts about 1776.
I've never wanted to be Blythe Danner less than after watching this musical in which she stars as Martha Jefferson. Unrecognizably so, I will add. But
ooh, yeah. I mean, this is a suggestion that we've had from some folks over time. And, I've just been thinking a lot about like musicals and like historical production, like historical dramas and whatever. So this kind of hit me at a good moment. We were just talking about the Elvis movie, which I have not seen yet. And I'm not sure if I will. Like, I don't know why they're making me go to a theater when I'm not prepared to do that right now. But like, I'm wondering if I can emotionally, spiritually handle that film at this time.
I don't know. So we chose to talk about the 1776 film version of the musical, which, like the Watergate scandal, turned 50 this year. This is a musical retelling that I'm not sure I was ever like really prepared for. I think that my like romantic vision of the man who played Mr. Feeny being in a starring role allowed me to block out the other like 2 hours and 44 minutes of this 2 hour and 45-minute feature.
Yeah, it's interesting that you were looking up the runtime of Hamilton before because you imagined that was a lot shorter than this movie. And in fact, it's not, I don't think, but it just felt that way to you.
It felt very different to me. So I saw Hamilton in theaters several years ago. I first saw this 1776 on a wheeled out television at my high school. I chose to rewatch this on Amazon Prime. When they were talking about tyranny, I was like, I get it. I've been strapped to this chair for hours watching this musical.
I'm actually shocked to hear that you watched this in high school because I know that you, like me, went to a Catholic high school, and that's a very abstinence-only environment. And this is actually a very sex-positive, like, sex-forward in ways I wish it was not production.
Yes, I will agree with you there. I will say, like, two things. Like, there is a part of this that did make me cry in a positive way. And there was another part of me that made me wonder, like, am I still all here? So wow. There was a part of this that I found to be like extremely beautiful. So much more of this was about just like men missing having women in their lives than I ever could have recalled. And I think there are different reasons why they chose to like explore that in such depth. Honestly, like the way that this production goes, right? It covers the Continental Congress's struggle to get us to a Declaration of Independence. I think because partially what's been going on in the country, an hour in, I was like, everyone should go home to their wives and we should just like think about this another time.
I agree. It's sort of like, I want to start there, like before we even like roll credits on this movie, like what is the situation, or like what was the call for a 1776 in 1969 when the stage production premiered first, and then this film was released in 1972? So like what happened where in 1969 somebody was like, you know what this world needs, like a dramatic and largely historically inaccurate imagination of the Second Continental Congress and the decision to adopt independence, like with only white guys, no women, like no domestic scenes really, but for one, and we'll get there, but like what was the call for this?
Okay, here's what I think. Peter H. Hunt, director, Peter Stone, who wrote the playbook, Sherman Edwards, right? Like, this is his concept. What I think was occurring is, like, they kept hearing British invasion and they were like, write those words on a board.
Wow.
British invasion, British invasion. They were like, it's too soon for like a Beatles or a pop musical. Like, we're still just like really thick in it. They're like, what if we did the first British invasion? And someone was like, does that mean French and Indian War? And they said no. Like, Impressment Act, Stamp Act, Sugar Act. They're like, we're going there. Like, I don't know that that's really gonna work. And they're like, okay, what are academics writing about right now? They're like, well, some of them are writing about poor people.
No,
that's not gonna work.
Nope.
They're like, find the white guys who have endowed chairs. And they're like, great, I've got it. They're only writing about the same 20 other white guys. And they're like, we can take that on.
Yeah. I think they like caught an angle of themselves in the mirror and they're like, wait a second, but what if it was guys like me? Like, what if it was about me? I just want to say that, like, if there was going to be a cultural imperial takeover, I would much rather, like, in terms of like cinematic musical masterpieces, if the American Revolution, if the United States was being represented by this musical and the British Empire was being represented by Spice World, like, the revolution would have gone a different way. Like, that's a cinematic masterpiece. This is a lot. Like, what we consumed for this episode was confusing. It was all over the place. And I do think in some ways from 1969, it's a reaction to what some probably perceived as like an upending of the social order, where people are like, but what if we took it back to the beginning? Like, what if we brought you all back to the egg and we reminded you of like why we're all here? Like, wouldn't that make you feel better if you understood like our core founding principles?
I went back and read some newspaper articles from when this was first coming out, and that's like very much part of the conversation that people were having, essentially saying, you know, like, what can we learn from going back to the source? And I think we live in a time where like discussions on a very high but also like frequent level about originalist interpretations or just like originalist views of the Constitution are so common. I think part of what this musical was trying to do is to like humanize the men in the room who are making these decisions. And there's more tension around like key issues that we still discuss today than I remembered, right? Like the outright tension between different ideas about slavery and freedom are like right there on the surface. I think part of the challenge is like, as a culture, we do still have this prevailing obsession with thinking that like the things that happened in that room between May and July of 1776 are what our country should be, right? Like how much you think that matters, I think unfortunately is such a big part of our world right now. And that actually made me kind of sad to look back 50 years ago and say, wow, like we really are still having the same conversation. And it's like, those people haven't changed, but I wish we had changed a lot more.
Yeah, especially in our like in some folks' embrace of like their original intent, and that being something that we measure our current lives against, or like what we will allow our country to become now. Like, I also find it really striking that this was coming to life on stage and on screen during the Vietnam War. And an interesting juxtaposition in the way that they choose to structure this is like, okay, this is set in, you know, July 1776, like during the Second Continental Congress. George Washington is in the field. And there's this kind of trope where like a beleaguered messenger from Washington's troops like comes into the legislative room and like hands a message to John Hancock or the secretary, and then without a word like leaves and immediately goes back, presumably to the front. And I like that's played for comedy. And then there's like a dramatic song that goes on too long in the like later part of the film by that person. But so you do get a bit of their experience and sort of like an overly dramatic recounting of like him losing his friends at Lexington and Concord. And he's still here. And like, you know, it's hard, but it's like most of the like there is no fighting on screen. Like as much as the war is also shaping events that are happening then, like the people doing the fighting, all of that experience is off stage. And it's truly just like on sort of the hijinks of the men in this room.
There is definitely a back and forth, as you're saying, to this like context, like this having been written and debuted during like some of the worst years of controversy over being in Vietnam, of like, are Congresses made up of buffoons and foolish people, or are they made up of people who are really principled and who care? And I think part of like the takeaway of 1776 is the answer is that they are both, and that is why they don't function, right? Because you have the John Adams who's highly principled and willing to argue over whether inalienable or unalienable is the correct or the only word. And then you have people like Stephen Hopkins represent Rhode Island, who's like caught on the toilet a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And it's like, the problem isn't that they're all one thing or another. It's that eclectic group of people has to find some way to get along and to agree. I think what was kind of missing for me, honestly, and that I was surprised by, like, obviously I know the outcome, right? I know that the Declaration of Independence gets finished. That's like the arc that you're building to the entire time. Like, surprise, we get there. When I watched Hamilton, or when I've consumed other kinds of media, the John Adams special that HBO produced years ago is probably my favorite representation of this era and of any of like kind of like this like insight into that history. When I watched this, like, I felt no tension. I was like, I don't care what happens next. Like, I didn't feel anything kind of building up. And like, completely joking aside, the only thing that you feel kind of like nervous about or unresolved is like, is John ever gonna see Abigail again?
Yeah.
And even then I was like, well, I know he does. And I also feel like, I know Philadelphia and Quincy were decently far apart. I was like, y'all could have had one hangout.
Yeah, like that all feels very weird to me. Like it's, yeah, I think like to kind of return to your previous point, which I think is worth meditating on, like how much things have changed and not, and how we imagine the so-called founding fathers or their importance is like, you know, I took some flack for like what I originally said about Hamilton, but my feelings on it have not changed. But if you think about the fact that the entire premise of 1776 is like, this is the room where it happened, and like the people who are in this room matter the most, and like therefore we should really get into like their opinions on all these different things and understand these conflicts, and what's happening outside the room is like less important. Like the other power relationships or important relationships like John and Abigail Adams, for example, and like all these other things are like people who work outside of this room and like whose lives are equally affected by this. It's kind of like in Hamilton, that kind of understanding is not really changed that much. Like the room where it happened is like also really important. And it's kind of, I think we need to kind of broaden the scope of who matters and why, but also like these other relationships, like the other parts of their lives where the stakes are also apparent. Like we get like this weird dream sequence where he imagines like Abigail in Quincy at different times, and she seems to be kind of like fine, even as she's like, well, like the kids all have measles and we've run out of pins and like we're running down on food. It's like they just kind of keep having these back and forths, which are based from their actual letters. But I don't know. This was a lot. And I was also just reading that like, it's interesting how John Adams like shaped his own characterization in this musical, because if you went by the things people actually said about him when he was there at this, you know, congressional meeting, he was not hated. Not like this.
No.
Like the opening song of this musical is like, sit down, John. And people are like, he's such a crank. Like, enough. Like, you're just a buzzsaw. Like, we get it.
Good God, what in the hell are you waiting for? Sit down, John. Sit down, John. Thomas, for God's sake, listen to me. Sit down. Sit down. I had enough of you, sir. Sit down, now listen.
It's like he wrote about himself that way as an older man in the 1820s. And that sort of caught on, like this crankiness. But to your point, like that's why I really like, of all pop culture imaginations of the revolution, I love like the 17 or like the John Adams miniseries, because you get a more like well-rounded sense of him. And there's anachronisms in that as well. But like you get a sense of them as people and their lives as like having all these different colors and dimensions. And that you don't really get that here.
I think part of what's going on in this musical and like what might have been happening in the wider zeitgeist is like John Adams is also meant to stand in for like Boston and therefore Massachusetts patriots, right? And there's a moment where he says, I'm not promoting John Adams, I'm promoting independence. And there's a moment where someone else accuses him of basically trying to like boost the profile of Samuel Adams. And there's a lot of kind of conversation like, why is it always Boston that breaks the king's peace? Leave it where it belongs, meaning the rebellion in New England. Like, right, this sense that New England is like the seed and the heart of this fight for liberty. And a lot of really smart scholars have had to like absolutely undo and like overturn that idea, right? Like Boston was not this especially like free place. It was not the most radical place. But I think it probably went back to like what was happening in the 60s and 70s, which was Massachusetts being at the forefront of a lot of historic preservation. And like, I'll just be real, like it's happening again with the celebrations that are coming up for 2026. This notion that like Lexington and Concord and Faneuil Hall and all these sites in Boston are like the most important place, along with Philadelphia, to understand freedom. And it's like, they're not. I'll just say that. I think they are important places. They are not the only or the most important. But I think John is like forced to do a lot of work of like, one, he's kind of a foil to like Ben Franklin, who's supposed to be like cool and a little bit more free sexually, right? Whereas like John only wants to be with Abigail. And John is like single-mindedly in favor of independence. I think that was doing work in the 60s and 70s of like, speaking to people in the American South at that time and saying like, you are not the source of these ideas, right? The people of the South, the freedom riders of that era, like you are not where these ideas for freedom come from. Like they come from John Adams, who's like cranky and misunderstood. And I think about that as a lesson, and it's like, no, I cannot recommend this musical.
Who, yeah. And to your point, like of the kind of
everyone turns this episode off.
Everyone's like, I've heard enough. Goodbye.
Right,
I've heard enough.
Okay.
But like, I think to your point, and we've kind of weirdly had a kind of Nixon Watergate couple of months on this show. And this episode is weirdly part of that in a way I didn't anticipate, which is there's a song called Cool Men, I think it's called. And it's a very strange musical number. And I would say like the second, third part of the show where the representative from South Carolina has just done this like very histrionic song about the relationship, or like basically he like read the chapter in the textbook on the triangle trade and was like, and now I will put this to song. And he basically was like, you and the North profit from slavery too. And everyone was like, okay, because the premise of the entire musical is that the group will not vote for independence until they can hash out the Declaration of Independence, which is not at all what happened. But for the premise of this musical, they're like, sure, we're going to make it that. So Thomas Jefferson writes in an anti-slavery clause, which is like, LOL, rich. And South Carolina is like, how dare you? Like, this is our way of life. He does this like dramatic song about the triangle trade. And then all like the Northerners like leave the chambers. And then all of the Southern delegates do literally a minuet. And it's wild. Like, it is truly a wild number. But in the course of that, they say like, to the right, never to the left, always to the right.
Come ye cool, considerate set. We'll dance together to the same minuet. To the right, ever to the right, never to the left, forever to the right.
And this film was aired for President Nixon in 1972. And he was close friends with one of the producers. And he basically said to this producer, this musical number has to go right now. Because it was anachronistic in the sense that I think if you watch this, you might think, oh, they're talking about sort of like burgeoning French revolutionary politics and like left and right. No. Like, and that wouldn't have made sense in the time for a whole host of reasons. Nixon watched this and was like, this is making conservatives look bad. Because they keep saying to the right, always to the right, never to the left. And it's sort of like, in a way, in that scene, I think the audience is meant to kind of like laugh at them as being like histrionic and overdramatic and like taking themselves too seriously and thinking that they know more than everyone else. And I think you could kind of see conservatives in that time in that way, in a sense of like, we're the ones who are guarding the true flame of what it means to be an American in our institutions, including slavery in that institution, which I think, is our great national sin, that, they're right. And we're still dealing with that, but that's not how they would take that. And Nixon watching this was like, we can't be seen to represent this, or like, that can't go on. Even if he didn't see himself as a conservative, he asked that it be taken from the film, and it was cut out of the original film before it was widely released. And like, even on, like, if you go on IMDb in the trivia, it's like truly out of pocket information about this, where allegedly like the producer, like on his deathbed, was like, I think I ruined the film in the edit, like, I don't know. And it's like, oh my God, like, but I mean, that's like the stakes for that man. But it's really wild to me that Nixon was invested in actually like making cuts or like editorial suggestions on something as silly as this movie.
Well, I think, at the time too, right? Like this idea that this is going to like introduce entire scores and generations of people to like the story, right? Like that this is going to be a highly important vehicle. I'm sorry to be this person. I'm sure the new Top Gun was wonderful. We know that the American military had a say. I say that as if it's just one monolith, but we know that the US government had a say, right, in how that movie was produced and the messages that it put out. We've talked about that before. I was surprised by the bluntness of like implicating New England states in the slave trade, but also it's like the whole sort of like bigger story here, right? Of like how many people are not free, what tyranny actually looks like. Like you're not getting any of that in this musical. What really sort of like took me aback that I was not expecting, and again, I basically just told people like not to watch it. The scene where Jefferson is listening in as they are reading his words made me feel like extremely moved and extremely emotional, because I think like part of where this comes from is like these documents do have a power, right? Like we wouldn't still be talking about them if they didn't have a power. And when he hears people listening to the sound of those words the first time that they come out, I've attended events before where people read the Declaration in costume and uniform to kind of convey some of that, this notion of like what they were really doing. I think the parts of this I like the best is when they're explicit that this is treason at the very least, and that this could cost them all their lives. There's so much about them just wanting to like get with their wives who they miss that like muddies so much of it for me. Like there's so much extraneous stuff happening in here. Like, why are we watching Benjamin Franklin get a portrait done? Why did we have to include the eagle versus turkey conversation? Like, I'm not sure.
Wow.
The Martha Jefferson scene where there's like an extended sexual innuendo about playing the violin, I couldn't do it after a while. Like I had to pause and get a fresh drink because I was like, I just don't know how much of this like I'm mentally able to commit to.
Yeah, I want to drop down on that because I think that's a really important piece of this. First of all, not many people know that the Paltrow Blythe Danner family have a commitment to having every member of their generation star in some kind of film about the American Revolution. Let me explain. So Blythe Danner stars, as you know, as Martha Jefferson in this, and I will return to how she is used in this movie, but Gwyneth Paltrow goes on to star as Thomas Jefferson's daughter in Monticello, or Midnight at Monticello, or whatever that movie's called that's truly terrible, in which Nick Nolte plays Thomas Jefferson, and it imagines the Sally Hemings relationship and her, like, basically Gwyneth Paltrow, like, punishing Sally Hemings and being weirdly jealous of, like, her hold over her dad. Like, it's a very strange movie. It is on YouTube. Go check it out. It's, like, very bizarre. I don't know why they made this movie, but, like, I wonder if they ever had conversations that are like, wow, what did we get mixed up with here? Like, us playing Jefferson women is, like, kind of a wild choice for us. Like, not really sure either one has aged well. But in 1776, there's basically, I won't even call it a B plot. It's kind of an A between A and B plot. Like it seems very important to note that Thomas Jefferson is like horny, and that's why he can't write the Declaration of Independence. And only that John Adams brings Martha to Philadelphia is he able to write the Declaration.
I hate that part of this. I just have to like come right out and say it. Like, I hate that part of this, not because of like the fact that you just stated. This week, right, like there was a whole discourse on the internet about people being frustrated that the tours at Monticello talk, quote, too much about slavery, right? Or like about the, quote, wrong things about Thomas Jefferson. And I think part of what really bothered me about that kind of like endless sort of like tittering in this like representation of 1776, we know from Ben Franklin's venereal disease history that these men were using sex workers, they were paying sex workers, that they were having sex with enslaved women, that they were forcibly raping enslaved women. And it was kind of making me like upset to watch this kind of endless joke in inverted commas of like, oh, they're so touch starved, they can't write this important document. And that was really irritating to me because, again, maybe they didn't know this at the time, but like now we know that like their non-consensual relations with women were like, especially enslaved women, like a huge part of their life. So this idea that like they're so, like it had incel vibes that I was not expecting, and it was like really starting to bother me. Even John Adams was like, oh, if I could like get with my favorite pillow, which is Abigail's bosom. And I was like, I don't want this.
It was like, it was really upsetting. It was like so upsetting. It was like men on Reddit. Like, I just can't. Like, it was just, and it was like also like we were supposed to imagine like Thomas Jefferson is like Jack Harlow or something, where it's like he's hot. Like, nobody gets it. Like, he's the hottest man here, and he has a wife, and like they should be together. I know that's like triggering too, and I don't mean it in like a triggering way.
Don't invoke Jack Harlow because I love Jack Harlow now.
Okay, like that's a complicated question for me. I think like I did just listen to an episode of there's a show called Popcast, New York Times like music podcast, and I was listening to the Jack Harlow episode because I just want to understand like what the hold is that it has over you. And like I'll just say like that jury is still out. Like I don't know, but they had him, like they had all these music critics debating him, or just kind of like talking about how conscious he is in shaping his fandom, and how like unlike a lot of other white rappers, he's sort of made the decision to like center Black women as his fan base, and like that if you go to one of his shows, like a lot of people feel supported and it's not like a bad scene. So I don't know, like there's that. But I mean, I think like he's also presenting himself as like he's hot. Like that's part of the marketing around him, I think, is like fair to say.
He's tricked me.
Yeah.
Him and Young Gravy. You know, it's like
what?
You don't see it coming.
Wow.
You don't see it coming. And then here it is, right? But I think part of it is, you know, even if we wanted to do some sort of like Bechdel test or something on this and say like, hey, are there any women who are like actually providing anything of value other than like maybe Abigail Adams as like a, you know, an emotional like endless like valve of support for John Adams? No. Again, like back to the period that this is coming from, this is an extremely unflattering representation of masculinity that really is fascinating in the context of the 70s. Like these men are effectively like impotent on every level. Like the only man, air quotes, that seems to be like accomplishing anything is George Washington, and he's never seen and he's only heard indirectly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And to return to the scene that I think for you was a positive, but for me was like a negative of like Jefferson listening to his words be read. Like to me, when authors publish or like present their work, it's sometimes used the metaphor of like birth, or like this is being born into the world. And to me, it actually like really felt like impotency. Like people kept kind of like shouting down his words or interrupting, or like there was no kind of like, you know, just general appreciation or even acknowledgement. And I also found, because there was such a farce leading up to it of like that truly offensive, in light of everything we know, like presentation of Jefferson as like he can't like create this founding document unless he like, you know, has sex with his wife. It's so offensive and bizarre. And it's especially made bizarre when it's played as a farce or just like ha 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 by like Adams and Franklin, that when you get to that scene, like when they're reading the words, you can't help but just be like, I was so in my head about like the contradictions between Jefferson and the ideas he espoused in that document, that watching him listen, I almost wanted to like yell at him on screen and just be like, how do you not hear like the contradictions here? And I know that he both did and didn't. Like, he called slavery the firebell in the night that would haunt the nation, which of course it did. And yet, unlike what he says in this musical, he never made a move to free any of the people over whom he claimed ownership. So, you know, I mean, that just, I couldn't get beyond that in my head, I guess.
There was also news literally just this week that we're recording this from the Library of Congress that they uncovered another layer through forensic analysis of his writing, and a change in a critical moment from our fellow subjects to our fellow citizens. I think like part of what always pulls people back into this, right? And in our own kind of like lifetimes, right? Like the obsession with Watergate, or the obsession with like, you know, a different group of men like misbehaving in a room, right? Like kind of what's going on with this, like the promise of those words, right? Like the idea that like in the course of all of these events in humankind, like there is this break and people are doing something different. When they have the discussion about like whether they call the king a tyrant or not, he is one. I found that like so powerful and affecting, because we've had so many like major incidents of gaslighting on a national level in the past few years, and just kind of like thinking about how empires decline. I thought that was such a like amazing moment. I didn't expect after like, you know, a certain amount of like ho-hum, you know, we're kind of like, we're in the bedroom with Jefferson. I didn't expect that moment to affect me. And then it did, because I think those words like do still carry a kind of meaning. And you know, to the people who work at places like Monticello, who have to talk about these contradictions every single day, they're getting white nationalists on their tour, and they're getting people who just like absolutely refuse to do any of this. And I think, you know, I'm not going to like reverse my previous course and say, so go watch 1776, but like hearing those words said aloud, I think is always like a really powerful antidote to like the conversations that fly around them, right? Like actually listening to people say those things. You know, I used to coordinate a community reading of Frederick Douglass, and it's like, don't just read Frederick Douglass on like an infographic. That's valid too, but like actually sitting and listening to people read a quality speech for an hour or more is a very different experience than someone on a cable news network like regurgitating some random idea that they had about it once. Like that's a value that 1776 as a musical has for me. I had a conversation with a friend who saw Hamilton for the first time only like 6 months ago. He was like, I can't believe you like this. Like, what do you mean? He said, it's so corny and it feels so false to like the world that we live in right now. And I said, honestly, I think if you saw it when it first came out, or 2 years ago, or even 3 years ago, it felt different, right? Like, when this came out in 69 versus when it came out on film in 72, they probably even felt really different about how it was received. Like we've lived through a similar period of like 69 to 72 is not pleasant. Just like the year that Hamilton came out to now, it's like we've changed a lot. Like if you saw that opening night versus you're watching Hamilton now, we live in a different country.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I think a lot of this gets at memory and how we think about the American Revolution, or how we like think about our shared past. Like even when I'm remembering when Lin-Manuel Miranda had his last night as Hamilton, they played him off with the West Wing theme song, which I guess is like his favorite show. And not to like make this connection, but like the president of West Wing is Josiah Bartlett, who's a descendant of Bartlett, who is at the Second Continental Congress and is referenced in this musical. So it's like, that's kind of a trip, but whatever. Like, I think West Wing, like, if you ask someone now to watch West Wing who has never seen it, they think it's also corny or, like, way too earnest, or it's, like, naive or too innocent.
I can't watch it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people can't watch it. And, you know, there's an interesting podcast where one of the cast members like rewatches all the episodes and brings on certain cast members, and they talk about how, the parts of it that haven't aged well. And it's actually really interesting if no one's listened to it, but I grew up on that show. And so like it reads really different to me now than it did when it was first aired, because like you're saying, we're in a different country. And I think even John Adams, like looking back as an older man on this time in his life, saw himself as like, I guess like insecure. He was like, thought he was disliked in this period more than he likely was, like by contemporaries. But, his country had changed in his lifetime. He was there at the beginning and had changed. And there's that quote in the musical that's like, people will remember Ben Franklin like smote out of the ground with a lightning bolt, and like, that he will like manifest George Washington on a horse. Like, and he wasn't wrong. Like those, they were heroes of this era. But I think to kind of the bigger conversation we're having is like, what is the distance between our founding ideals and our lived reality, and how do people process that distance? Like, or is it with anger? Is it with longing? Is it with hope? And I think those responses are individual, but also shaped by what's happening, in the moments when you have those moments of reflection.
Can I just say that John Adams is a Scorpio?
That so fits, honestly. What's Abigail?
Okay, let's find out.
Can I just say my favorite moment, if no one has ever seen Diana the musical, like please put your lives on hold if you want to laugh. Like it's so comically bad. I cried. Like I was laughing so hard I cried. But there's a scene where Diana's like singing about Charles and she's like, what did I expect from marrying a Scorpio? And I'm like, whoa, I didn't know Charles was a Scorpio.
She's a Sagittarius, like, but right on the cusp. Like,
love that.
I'm sorry. I know
that.
that we just got photos of new galaxies. That's like an eighth of as interesting as this is to me.
Yes.
Like being completely serious, there is something about John Adams where like he does a lot of like revision within his own lifetime, and this like musical really plays that up, right? Like that he is this kind of like conscience from New England, right? And like that's what he represents. I know why, but I wish there had been more other people who mattered in this, for lack of a better word, like other kind of people kind of becoming more prominent over the course of it. Like Ben Franklin also kind of quoting himself makes him seem like such a bizarre, like old goof.
Yeah.
At this point.
I find like depictions of Ben Franklin or explorations of him like really fascinating. Like there's that book, The Americanization of Ben Franklin by Gordon Wood, that I actually think is Gordon Wood's best book. Like, don't at me, but I do think it is a really interesting book. And Ken Burns just came out with his Ben Franklin documentary, which I saw.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah,
we needed it.
We didn't really know much about Ben Franklin to this point, so I'm really glad that Ken got on top of that. But I mean, I think that there are moments in his life that nobody really talks about or like plays up, in the sense of like every caricature of him is like this jovial guy. He's like super fun because he's like too smart for the room, and he's already accomplished enough that like he doesn't really need people to like him or impress people. So he's just kind of like ha ha ha, like moving through scenes, laughing. And at one point he's like, me and slavery, like I founded the Anti-Slavery Society. And it's like he actually didn't found that until after the revolution. So it's really weird how far they bent over backwards to make him seem like woke in 1972 by like literally reimagining the timeline of his life.
There's also a moment where they're like, Benjamin Franklin, the inventor of the stove. And I was just like, that's not
weird.
Okay. We can move past that. Probably the most iconic moment for me that stands out that's like a part way is at 1 hour 42 minutes. They all just start shouting men. And I was like,
oh my God.
Sometimes they say the implicit part, like even louder, where I think like I was sort of, I mentioned in our previous recording that I went to like a penny arcade and an old fashioned arcade to prepare to like get into Rebecca's mindset to talk about Coney Island. That journey took me through like a rural area where many people basically, like if we were to plop this cast in that part of the area I live in, they'd be like, that's weird. Like these people are using all of our slogans to decorate their house. And it would be like, weird is one word for it, right? Like we have, the famous like design by Benjamin Franklin, for like promoting or questioning like the end of tyranny with the different colonies forming the serpent, a lot of Second Amendment, they'd be like, oh, okay, like that's some of our work. You know, they would recognize a lot of that. I think part of what's like troubling looking at it now, and again, I'm not critiquing a 50-year-old musical just to like make myself feel good, right? I've never made a musical. The revolution feels so bloodless here because it's men in a room with feathers and quills and like talking about eagles and like wanting to like get with their wives' pillows. I get that, right? Like that's part of the comedic effect. But the reality being that like a lot of people fought really difficult, really bloody, like frozen, horrific battles to actually make this revolution happen. I don't know that that is really explained super well, because even in my own mind, it's like we have these moments, we have these documents, and then this just is a country. But the fact that Washington already has the militia, right? Like the fact that people are already actually fighting, the fact that it will be like years of this kind of endless struggle to figure out what any of that means. That part of this being an actual revolution and the insurrection and the violence part of it, you get none of that here. And I think part of that was a weird Cold War message of like proper countries, meaning like white imperialist countries run by like white regimes, use pieces of paper. And it's like, well, that's also not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Blythe Danner is like, look at the violin. It's like, we know you're not talking about the violin.
You know what's crazy is I looked up, like, she does this dance routine with Ben Franklin and John Adams, and it's like, I kind of left my body during that. Like, I'll be honest, I was like, it's like, it
scared me.
It's a lot.
It scared me.
Well, it's like from nowhere. She's like, ha ha ha, like my husband's still sleeping. Like we were up late last night, like LOL. And they're like, ooh. And then she like comes down and like does a dance routine with them by a fountain. But I was reading that fountain is the Friends fountain from the Friends opening theme. So it's like really weird to like have those like material culture pieces in conversation, but it's also weird because like they kind of do this buddy film structure to this where they're like Ben Franklin and John Adams are like two people who like don't really like each other, but they both love independence, so they're gonna like do a buddy comedy like through this whole thing to like make America happen. And it's just really odd because like they did not like each other, and so it's odd that they like forced that pairing.
I want to say this about Martha. I wanted to get some insider intel. So I went on the Monticello website and I went on the page about Martha Wales Jefferson. I was like, okay, tell me everything I might want to know. They're like, we don't know a lot. Here's what we do know. Isaac Granger Jefferson, who wrote Memoirs of a Monticello Slave, is basically like, her daughter was pretty like her mother. And they're like, from there, other people said that she was pretty, and that's all you need to know. It's like she also copied a poem once, and that's one of the few things that we have about her. I think what's actually fascinating is that she's such a non-entity in actuality in terms of like the history we should be talking about at that site, and kind of bizarrely how much more we're able to know about Sally Hemings because of the fantastic research that people have done, and the fact that it's actually Isaac Granger Jefferson who's leaving us any of these crumbs at all. Like, imagine if you held someone captive for a period of time and then they called you pretty. Like, we need to think about what kind of source that actually is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And it's also weird because like what little we do know is like she just had a miscarriage in the timeline of this film. So she definitely did not come to Philadelphia, but it's interesting that it's like these other parts of life that are just as devastating or important are just like not deemed worthy of something like this film or this story. Instead, it's like they're almost doing this like psychotic like rewrite where it's like, no, you're fine. Like you didn't have, that didn't happen to you. Instead, you came to Philadelphia and you danced in a fountain with Ben Franklin. It's like, what? Like it's so much.
Is this like an incel version of look over here, not over here? Like, even in his lifetime, people were like, well, everyone knows what's going on in Jefferson's bedroom.
Right.
And the truth was that he was raping Sally Hemings this is kind of like a bizarre replication of that in its own way, where it's like, well, everyone knows about Jefferson and the sex stuff, but then they're talking about the wrong thing. It's like a replication of 18th century jokes, except by this time, it's like you should have done different and better.
Yeah, but I also think that like putting it in those terms, it makes perfect sense. They would do this in this moment where it's like the country feels like it's coming apart in 1969, and this whole vision of like the whole world is watching and all this stuff. And it's like in a moment of crisis, some people think the answer is to like double down on traditional air quotes values like marriage, family, country. And it's like, that's what this musical is truly all about. So it's like, it does help like overcorrect probably the shattering memory of Thomas Jefferson in that period, or like work was starting to probably come out reinvestigating that. And they're like, no. Like, as you say, don't look over here, look over there. And on that point, like the book, How the Word Was Passed, which just came out last year, is really, really excellent. Like it has a chapter on Monticello where he goes there and is like, he goes on the main tour, and then he goes on a tour that's specifically focused on slavery at Monticello, and has a white guide who's a retired military officer, like a career military officer, who gives by his account like an excellent and unequivocal like acknowledgement of everything in by way of violence that happened at Monticello. And then he seeks out two women from, I think, Texas on the tour, who were like genuinely like, we had no idea that he enslaved people here before this tour. Like we never learned that in school. And like, it's not the white nationalist response that shows up on the TripAdvisor reviews, which are also interesting to read through, but you can kind of get a sense of like how much effort they're going to at Monticello to do that work and to really center that story, like despite what feedback they're getting. But, you know, for people who are interested, it's a really well done piece.
I will tell you, like talking to people about, you know, the different ways that Rhode Islanders invested and like supported and held up the slave trade, and like the way that that's connected to industry and all those kinds of things. I have a lot of what I interpret as good faith conversations with people where we get more than like a paragraph into the discussion, and it is very clear to me that the actual terms of what slavery was and is were never explained to them in school. That they were taught a narrative about slavery that is so completely outside of reality, right? And that is like surging in a lot of parts of this country right now because of legislation. Like the first time I encountered this was over a decade ago, where I was talking about a person who was sold into bondage and freed himself by winning the lottery. And this woman, completely serious, like her hand shot up and she said, why would he agree to any of that? So we had a conversation about like kidnapping and the different ways that this worked. And I think that's where like language shifts, like hostages, right? Like it has a place when people are kind of with you and you're talking this through. I would say it's once a week I have a conversation where someone seems genuinely blindsided by the way the cotton economy worked, because it was so never a part of anything that they had learned. And I think what's coming out is sites that have done a really fantastic job at recruiting people, right? And like really changing their staffs for the better are also finding that, you know, the toxic toll of having white nationalists, or even just having people who constantly are questioning you on your tour, it's a lot, right? And like for me to explain these concepts is very different than a Black interpreter who gets disrespected about everything, just about. So I feel like I field a lot of good faith questions because of who I am and how I represent to the world. And we know with this Monticello thing, I watched it myself at Mount Vernon. I watched someone constantly question a white interpreter. I watched someone constantly question a Black interpreter. And I honestly, like, I know because I read about these things, but like the toll that this takes on people, unfortunately, it's like if you work at a site that's driven by good TripAdvisor reviews, those people's jobs are not secure and they can't do this work. And then we have people going back to like Feeny teaching us 76. Like that's probably not the world that we want, but I think it is the world that some people want. And that's where this stuff gets really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it's hot. It's openly hostile in a lot of these places. And I think part of the issue is that like house museums themselves are really born out of kind of a lot of white supremacist ideals that are really bound up in, you know, ideas of what American history and culture was back in the 19th century when these were really being developed. And I don't know. I mean, I think something too that's kind of happening in this film and happening in a lot of places in New England and other areas is like white people in the North do not want to see themselves as part of any kind of like racial unrest narrative. Like they, even in histories of the civil rights movement, like so much of it is located in the South, and it erases like the real segregation and racism that like still exists in the North. And I think that also comes out in seeing like a 1969, 1972 depiction of, you know, like, yeah, there's the song about the triangle trade, but like John Adams, like you said earlier, represents like this Northern sort of like higher virtue. And I think that that's also telling of the story that white people in the North were telling themselves about like coming off the civil rights movement or like going into like a period of frustration or like disappointment about the civil rights movement in that same moment.
Well, his whole thing, right? Like, I am obnoxious and disliked. It's like, it's turning like actual human rights struggles into like, oh, so people don't like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like, so people don't like me. I have to go cry by the bell and like write letters to my wife because I'm very upset. And I mean, that's sort of the whole thing about like turning your country's founders into a cast of Marvel characters. It's not actually productive. It gets people to watch TV. It's not actually how anything worked, right? And so again, it's like, it's not to fault this musical, but to say like, this is how a lot of people learn things. It's how a lot of people internalize things. A good thing that came out of this era was Schoolhouse Rock, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think did actually teach people a little bit more about procedure and all those kinds of things. But you get this sense, right? Like very much in the Hamilton way, decades later, like history has its eyes on these people. They're flipping the huge calendar pages from June to July. I think you're meant to see something going right at a time when so much seemed to be going wrong. And this kind of notion of like, this is the miracle of Philadelphia. It's very telling that to do that, you can never actually zoom out past, you know, the hall where they met or past like this very tight frame, because you'd have to show what Philadelphia actually looked like in that period, which was lots of people it held in like various degrees of unfreedom, emptying their privies, right? Like making all of this work. It was really interesting to me to watch the scene setting because it's a film. You could have done something slightly different. And they're like, no, like we're staying in this room, in this alleyway, in this bedroom, and this bell tower, and like don't even think we're going anywhere else. And it's like, well, yeah, if you only want to talk about these 20 white guys, I guess that's where we're staying for 2.5 hours.
Right.
Like that's where we're going to be. At least Hamilton, we had some other experiences. Obviously, that's far from perfect. There's a new 1776 that's being done in Cambridge right now that does a completely different kind of thing. And if people are curious, look up the American Repertory Theater. They have a project called We Declare Boston that takes on the legacy of the words of the Declaration and has people really interpret them and think about them for today. That is an actual like really fascinating take and like redo of this kind of story. But yeah, like if you have 3 hours and it's like cut someone's grass or watch this, like you should buy a lawnmower.
Yeah. I mean, I think,
or maybe you have one. I shouldn't assume. I don't know about our listeners.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I don't have one. So, you know, I can't like, you know, it's like those who don't do teach or tell people.
Teach.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'll be revisiting this for some time. Like it's in some weird way, like this to me is more in conversation with like the National Treasure movies than anything else. Cause it's just like it's like so absurd to me at this point that the fact that this was like taken seriously at some point is insane to me. But reading reviews from the period, someone was like, I was enchanted. Like I couldn't move in my seat. Yes. And you're like, what? Or were we watching the same movie? And like, even the fact that Nixon thought people seriously would like take like a critique of conservatives or like any kind of serious like political lesson from this is so bizarre. it's just, I would love to see like this Cambridge production. That sounds really awesome. Like, I think for me, I'm like a lot of other people where it's like, I am like moved by the founding ideals of our country, but disheartened by the ways that we continue not to live up to them. And I continue to hope that we're going to get there. And it's like that gulf between the distance and reality that like, motivates, a lot of us to keep moving forward and keep, looking to history for lessons about these things. But I'm not sure 1776, the musical, is the thing I'll be looking to for a lesson.
I found an article from the Honolulu Star Bulletin from September 1972, and it was essentially saying that, like there have been periods where the values and ideals of 1776 were not upheld. And this is like fascinating coming from a paper in Hawaii, right? Which like only very recently had become a state, like during the Maui time. And there is this one part. Hawaii statehood was another major advance in the march back to the ideals of 1776, giving America, as it did, its first state with a predominantly Oriental population. And it's like, first of all, that's not a word that people use today out. This is like from a primary source. Second of all, it's like you can really just like say anything about these ideals if you choose to like make them work. As we can celebrate Constitution Week, we can regret that we ever departed from the 1776 ideal. And it's like, what is it about colonies pulling away from an empire makes you think is in line with Hawaiian statehood? And it's like, oh, like white nationalists making things up. Okay, we've been doing that for a long time. I guess it's not surprising that we would do it in 1972. They're like, we should have never raised barriers. It would be a peaceful place. And like the next article over is about like Kissinger in Vietnam. And the guy's like, anyway, that's my 2 cents. Love that Hawaii's a state. Thanks, everyone. And they're like, when you hear about people getting released from prison after decades of unjust incarceration, many people will say that's proof that the legal system works because they got out. Not the people who are being let out. This is essentially the same argument where they're like, we do figure it out eventually. We do figure out how to acquire more territory. And that seems to be the goal. So,
or it's like, you see that kind of logic in the reporting on recent Supreme Court decisions. Obviously, the Roe decision, which is devastating, and gutting the Clean Air Act, and like all of these decisions that have been so devastating just in this one term. And people write about this and be like, but you know what? Like the beauty of the Supreme Court is like, it's all averaged out over time. Like things course correct. Like, don't worry, it'll be fine. And it's like, tell that to the millions of like women whose lives are going to be affected by this decision. Like tell that to all the other people and organizations that are going to be affected by these decisions. Like, it's just, it kind of reminds me of like the true meaning of that Joan Didion quote, like we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And people now invoke that as kind of a motivational or inspirational meaning. But its true meaning is like she wrote that in the 70s about people's impulse to revert to delusion to justify any action. And narrative can play a role in that process. Like you can tell yourself any story you want to convince yourself that some kind of behavior is okay. And, I think people use the so-called founding history of our country like to that purpose all the time. And it sounds like, the reinvention of 1776 in Cambridge, like that sounds like a cool reinterpretation. But, a lot of this style still is with us.
Yeah, but one time, like, someone asked John Adams to sit down. So I kind of feel like, in the arc of civil rights discourse, like, we haven't paid enough attention. Like,
yes.
Maybe he actually had a back issue or, like, he needed to stretch. And they asked him politely to sit back down. So that's pretty upsetting. Like, you do want to believe that things course correct. But, a man never gets over being asked to be quiet. So,
they really don't.
That was a rough day.
Oh, my God. At least
a rough day.
No one told him to smile. I mean, God knows what would have happened if somebody said, can you just smile?
I got told to smile 2 days ago.
What?
And it took me by surprise because I was looking at something and someone asked me, it was a portion of a larger program, the details of which do not matter. And this older gentleman just said, "Hey, why don't you try smiling?" And it took me by surprise because I was like in thought, right? Like I wasn't engaging with people. And I do actually, like smile and emote and like work hard to communicate while I'm at my job, because visual communication is a big part of it. And that really hasn't happened to me in a while. And I went, "Oh," and walked away because I was extremely uncomfortable. But also for me, it was like, there's nothing verbally that I really need to communicate to respond to that. And I did not smile. I sort of grimaced and walked away. But yeah, it was like a really sort of bizarre interaction that I had very, very briefly. But I was like, oh, so I've had my tripping incident. I had my smile.
No.
I do just want to note, because a listener sent this to us, which I think is important, wanted to point it out. There are a lot of restrictions on what people are being offered to learn about this period right now. And someone pointed out that even with some of these purges, the Felicity books have stayed. And you can kind of make of that what you will. But I think that's an important part of these conversations, right? Like that even some of the things that we really love, and maybe you really love 1776 and you think I've been horribly unkind, I think all of these things can be put on a plate together and we can talk about them. But I thought that was a pretty jarring and just important thing to bring up because it fits, right in this exact period that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like Ben, don't tell Ben to sit down.
Definitely don't. Well, I mean, don't tell Ben to meet you in Philadelphia. He'll never be able to figure that out, or he'll like draw you a map.
It's not what it looks like.
It's not what you think. It's not what you think. I mean, this is like a jarring anecdote, but this week in Connecticut, in Coventry, which is not that far from where I currently live, some parents went to the public library and demanded that all of the Pride books be burned. And I just can't fathom this happening in 2022, but it's like, here we are. And they were told to fill out a form to like go through a process about this, to like reevaluate collections. And then they never like followed up on that. But regardless, it's just like, it's a really scary time when people are so in their feelings or so threatened that they can't just allow exposure to various ideas. And it makes me think about like our previous episode on Witch of Blackbird Pond, which was about kind of like freedom of speech or like, valuing dissent in like the 1950s and the Cold War. And now it's like, here we are again with like conversations about banned books and what kinds of American history we're allowed to teach. Like, it's really sad.
Yeah, it's striking too that the second they were given like an actual procedure, they had nothing.
Right. And there's another movement going around that's funded by a like extreme Catholic group that during Pride Month especially was telling parents to go to public libraries and check out every Pride book in the children's section and then either hide it somewhere in the library or refuse to return them. And like basically to obstruct any kind of process, like you take it into your own hands to just physically remove books you think should not be exposed to children. And like that's also jarring because it's like they just are imagining like the rules, like no process applies to them. And in Connecticut though, where I live anyway, I only know of like one successful challenge, which was in a different library in Connecticut. Somebody thought, those books that have like cartoons that are like, who was like Barack Obama, or like who is like this person. They had one that was like, who is RuPaul? And someone was like, this is like pornography. Like children should not be exposed to RuPaul. Like this is wrong. And so they had to like remove it from the children's section. And like, I guess they're going to put it in the adult section somewhere. It's just kind of like, what are we doing with this? Like, it's just like sad and hateful, but also just like people who are uninformed getting like, I don't know, like choosing to be active in really hateful ways.
A woman tried to set up her 2-year-old grandson with another toddler at the beach today, like a toddler boy and a toddler girl. And I feel like there might be some overlap between like that behavior and a person who thinks that RuPaul is inappropriate for children.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like they'll dress their like toddler in like a mommy's little heartbreaker tee, but then it's like, don't you dare sexualize my children with a RuPaul bio.
I was like,
yeah.
Everyone involved is wearing swim diapers, so I think it is too early to discuss matrimony. That's me. Like, maybe that's my background. Maybe that's me projecting. Like, I think it might be a little bit too early for that. But I think we talked to a lot of educators as part of like what we do on the show. Someone had reached out with a wish list for educators. And by the time we got the link, like thankfully everyone had already bought everything on the wish list. Just to say like, thank you to people who do teach this hard stuff. This is coming out during summer. I think all of American history is hard stuff if you're doing it correctly. And I know a lot of people who teach all kinds of things. Maybe you teach physics. I don't think there's a ton of people who teach physics listening to us, but maybe you're out there. Thank you. E equals MC squared, so yes. We appreciate what you do as well. But if you have other kinds of content that you think is a more meaningful representation of patriotism or that inspires you, something like how the word is passed, we are also putting out a zine this month. So depending on when you listen, that is a listener collaboration with our fantastic intern this summer. Her name is Annalie Patwell. She is hot on the heels of Rebecca Rue Doyle, who made amazing designs for us, and we can't wait to see what Annalie comes up with. And in the meantime, if you want to keep sending us like your thoughts, theories, ideas, like case studies, anything, you're on here. You know how to reach us, and we love talking with you on the Discord community as well.
Completely. And if you want to join our summer program of Wikipedia editing, that's also available on the Discord. We posted a resource guide, and particularly if you've never done it before, I made some screencasts, and admittedly, they're all first takes. I'll just say that. But like, I basically used Donna Summer's Wikipedia page as an example of how to join the dashboard of our event and how you actually get into Wikipedia editing by like adding citations, which is super easy but helpful. And so if you've never done it before, it's something you can do that feels like making some kind of contribution to putting information out there that is real. So, we had fun like chatting the other night, and I'm going to try to organize like some informal hangs in that Discord channel. But, people were learning all kinds of like crazy trivia from editing pages on Black suffragists and a lot of topics that we're going to be exploring. I added a bunch of pages to our dashboard. So if you're not sure where to start, there's a bunch of examples on a range of topics from Mean Girls to Black suffragists to reproductive rights history. So like I said, Donna Summer. So, that's also like a thing we'll be kind of doing over the course of the summer.
Awesome. Donna Summer for summer. I love it.
Iconic. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe that she still needed citations on her page. That's insulting to her.
It is. I mean, it's not as insulting as asking a man to sit down, but what is?
Nothing could ever be that insulting.
Never I will say again. Great opening number. Solid opening number.
It tricks you because it opens strong, and then you're like, oh, this is going to be really good. And then you're like, oh, God, what happened?
Did I cry at Hamilton? Yeah, I did. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not above a lot of this, but, that's part of it.
I feel like my temperament is as a Leo, like I'm one sneeze away from like being overcome with tears. Like everything moves me. I'm not sure what's like going on. It could just be like the seasons, but this did not move me to tears. So, I mean, I guess there's that, but
once in 3 hours is not terrible. Like I'll take it. I mean, like I've seen worse things, but I've seen a lot better too. So.
Yeah, well, that's a relief. I mean, if you saw this and you were like, this is the best thing I've ever seen, like I would be really concerned for anybody, but that would actually be really bleak. But yeah, I mean, There's better musicals out there. If you want to tell us your favorite musicals or what we should be watching if we ever watch another musical with this show, like Allison, where can people find you?
At Allison Horrocks on all of the things. And Mary, how about you? SusicalTheMusical.com.
Absolutely not. I will say, like, my favorite musical of all time, and I don't really know what this says about me, or the one that I've seen in person, the best musical experience I've had was when I saw Aida, which is actually like, it was funded by Disney, which is like kind of the embarrassing part, but I saw it on an 8th grade field trip to New York, and it was Heather Headley, like, who now is on, my God, what is that Southern, like, soap on Netflix that we watch?
Oh, Steel Magnolias?
She's on that. Nope. She's on that. Okay. And it was the musical that Elton John wrote after Lion King. So, like, everyone else in the world is like, of course, Lion King is his best musical. And I'm like, no. Have you seen Aida? But that really does move me. And there's disco numbers in it, which I think Julie would appreciate. I've not seen that yet. But if you... If you want to chat about that and anything else, find me on Instagram at Mimi Mahoney. I'm on Twitter at Mary Mahoney123, but realistically, like, Instagram is like the easiest way to reach me.
Yes.
I'll leave it there. So, Allison, like, where are we going next with the show and with Patreon?
Where are we going next? So we are leaving the land of unruly men. We are leaving Nixon. We are leaving all of this behind. And we are reading The Birch Bark House, which is a much requested story that people have asked us. It is by Louise Erdrich. We are very, very excited to read this book. And the following month, which will be September 2022, we are reading Mean Baby, the autobiography of Selma Blair.
Very excited for both of those things, truly. Can't wait.
Yes. Yes, we cannot wait for both of those. So we hope that you will stay connected and that we will be with you through the fall.
Thank you, everyone. See you on our next episode.